Welcome to the S.O.A.P Bible Study Series from Oak Tree Community Church in South Bend, Indiana. We are starting not just a book this time, but we're going to start a series of books for the next few weeks.
Yeah.
We're going to dip our toes into some Old Testament prophets.
Nice.
And the minor prophets tend to be a little bit shorter.
Right.
And so we're bundling some of them together.
Right.
And so for the next 4 weeks, we're going to be in Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, and then Lamentations, which
Yeah,
technically is not a
really
minor prophet, but
All right, yeah.
Jeremiah wrote that, but it's a short book. So,
So, quick question. There's short books. Is that why they're minors?
partially, yeah, because
If they wrote more, you get in the major category?
yeah, basically, right, yeah. Lamentations is in the Hebrew Bible not even listed as one of the prophetic books. It's listed in the writings, which is in the later section, but Jeremiah wrote it at the end at the beginning of the exile, one of the exiles. So it is still a prophetic book.
Okay.
And it's found in the right after Jeremiah, so it's not part of the 12, but
Right. So, is it fair to say that the prophets all wrote in the period of time at the start of Kings to the exile?
most of them,
Or at least Old Testament, right?
yeah, most of them, because then you've got Haggai, Zechariah,
On the way back
and
in.
Malachi are
kind of on the
part
back
of
end.
the restoration,
Right.
the returns.
Yeah.
But all the rest of them are in the writing prophets anywhere in the Kings,
Right.
or leading up to the exile, and then those 3 are after the exile. Okay. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, so really, you put them all in Kings Chronicles. First, Second Kings, and Second Chronicles is where chronologically is where we're finding these guys. Yeah.
All right, so we're going to do Amos today, right?
Yep.
So I think we do the first 5 chapters because we got 5 days.
Yeah, we're going to do a one a week, or one a day rather. They're not long,
Right.
and just sort of helps us, punch through and.
Yeah, so it's kind of cool. Like you said, it's the time. Amos is the time of the divided kingdoms,
Yep.
and that's the time after Israel first started getting kings. You have Saul. You have I'll get it, David. Then you have Solomon,
Right.
and then shortly after Solomon's death and his son takes over, there's a division.
Yeah.
Right. The northern kingdom says we're not doing this anymore. It was actually we're not working as hard.
Yeah.
As Solomon wanted to, or the son wanted them to.
Yeah.
So they split into 2, and it led to a whole downfall.
Yeah.
And we went through Chronicles a while ago, and we just saw this period of time where there was bad king, ooh, an okay king, bad
Right.
king, bad king,
Right.
okay king. type of deal.
20 kings in the northern kingdom that's called sometimes Israel, sometimes called Samaria, because that was the capital. We'll see that in Amos. And 20 kings in Judah, the southern kingdom. All 20 in the northern kingdom are bad. No good ones in the northern kingdom at all. Only 8 of the 20, not even half, in the southern kingdom were considered good at some level. I mean,
Right, and if I
there's a
remember right,
range there.
very few of them were good all the way to the end,
Right.
too. And I think there might even have been a bad one that became good.
Yeah, exactly.
But,
Yeah.
that's about it.
And so what happened is that the northern kingdom was taken into exile about 100 years earlier than the southern kingdom, because there were a few good kings. It sort of dragged it out a little bit.
Right.
So when we get to that, sets us up for Amos, because some of these prophets we don't know when they prophesied.
Right. That's
There
what I was going
has
to
to
get
be
into.
something.
Like, where's it at? So Amos doesn't say when he did it, but there's clues.
Yeah.
Right. And he names 2 kings, and one
from
from
the
the
north.
northern, one from the southern, and there's an overlap
Yeah.
between the 2. So we haven't narrowed down to that period of the overlap.
Yep.
And he also mentions an earthquake.
Right.
And if we knew when the earthquake was, we'd really have it dated.
But what's really interesting is that the earthquake is referenced again in Zechariah. I think it's Zechariah, where it says, and don't forget how bad that earthquake was. It's like, hey, it must have been a bad earthquake.
Exactly.
So yeah, we've got a little range. So this was probably somewhere in the mid 700s Okay, so that means he's BC, right?
Yep.
So he's a contemporary of Isaiah. Amos and Isaiah were working about the same time, right?
All right. So Isaiah, we consider him a prophet. He didn't consider himself a prophet.
Not so much.
It says that he considers himself a herdsman who also took care of sycamore fig trees. Yeah, I looked it up.
Yeah, it's
Kind of
what it is.
It's kind of rare in Israel because they prefer a warmer climate, but so a specialized fig.
Yeah.
But more than likely, he either owned the herd or he was put in charge of the herd versus just being a herdsman type of deal.
Yeah, could be. It's one of those things though where you see him in a list sometimes of famous people that God used who were not, David was a shepherd, Moses was a whatever, Amos was a tree farmer and a herd type thing, right? And God was able to use them, so God can use you too. It's one of the few places Amos actually shows up in popular culture or religious culture.
Well, and as you read it, there's a lot of doom and gloom, especially this first week.
Yeah.
Because remember, God's trying to get the attention of both the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom.
Right.
And what's even worse is when he prophesied, more than likely it was during a period of prosperity. When things were at least financially going well.
Yep.
So a lot of the people were like, "What are you doing? Who are you?"
Yeah.
God's actually blessing us. If they even listened to God during that time.
Yeah, King Uzziah of Judah was a decent king. Sort of nominally good. He wasn't like super good. But King Jeroboam, this is King Jeroboam the second. There was Jeroboam was the first king of Israel, was the first king of divided Israel, the northern kingdom. This was a couple hundred years later, so 150 years later. So this is same guy, or it's not the same guy, but the same name. And under his watch, Israel really did get wealthy, which was sad because it was also under his watch that they fell into some major idol worship. So there is this huge discontinuity, and we see that in Amos, where he's going to start railing on them for their wealth, while at the same time
there's all these poor people that people are ignoring and not doing anything with,
and thinking that they're still being blessed by God.
Right. Well, we may or may not see that today.
Yeah,
right?
we may. It's in there.
No,
right?
I mean in our world today.
Yeah. Oh,
so so if we go through chapter by chapter, in chapter 1 and 2, we're going to see a lot of repetition.
Yeah.
So there's almost actually in your commentary you put a pattern in there, and it starts with this is what the Lord says, all 8 of them, and then it lists because.
Fill in the blank.
Yeah, it is. It really, it's like a line there. Put a verb here, or put a place here, and it's a city or a capital, and then it always says has committed 3 crimes. Wait, make that 4.
Yep.
And I will not revoke my decree of judgment. So then it lists what they sin against, and it kind of goes through this form, and at the very bottom there's some differences on the specific things.
Yeah, it's a boilerplate. I mean, it's just like 8 times over.
Yeah. So my question is, at the very beginning, you're reading this and it says, God says, you have committed 3 crimes. No, wait, 4 crimes. Did God forget? God doesn't forget.
8 times over?
Right.
No, it was 4, wasn't it?
And I don't believe he lists the 4 crimes for all of them. So any idea what's going on there?
Yeah, so this is a rhetorical device that you can use in your argument. You see it in Proverbs. So Proverbs chapter 6, there are 6 things the Lord hates. No, 7 things the Lord that are abomination to the Lord.
Right.
Then you list the things. In chapter 30, Proverbs 30, there are 3 things that I never understood. 4 things I never understood. There are 3 things that do this. There are 4 things. And so it's not about the actual number. It's about this multitude, this
problem, and it's getting bigger and
not quite to the level of exaggeration, but it's a poetic device to bring across the fact that we're not counting here. There's just this numerous thing. So is it 3 or 4? It's that's not the point.
Yeah.
Probably similar to what Jesus said to Peter, not 7 times, but 70 times 7 or 77 times or whatever, depending on your translation. It's not about the number. It's about let's stop thinking about the number and take care of the situation. Yeah.
In that case.
Yeah.
All right. So then it's who is God announcing these judgments against?
Yeah.
And we find that there was 5 cities that had attacked Israel, and there was judgments against them. But then there was also judgments against the northern and southern kingdom, and again Israel and Judah. I think they went with those names in there.
Yep. And each of these cities, like Damascus and Gaza and Tyre, they're representing nations. So Damascus was the capital of Syria. So you've got this, and it goes around in a circle almost, where I guess maybe not, but Philistia, Gaza was one of the capital of the Philistia. Tyre is up in Lebanon. Moab and Edom are down on. So really, it's if you got the Mediterranean Sea on this side, and here's the little strip that we call Israel. It's like everything surrounding Israel, and you too.
Yeah. Well, then he nails them too.
Yeah. So that's the first 2 chapters.
Yeah, exactly. And in chapter 2, there's a judgment against Moab, and that was the only one that didn't do something to Israel.
Yeah.
Right. And instead, they desecrated the corpse of one of their kings by burying him in lime.
Yeah.
And so, Old Testament, we see a couple times where they're picking up their father bones and moving, when they're moving as a family and taking their bones with them.
Yep.
Probably a pagan worship at some point. Christianity wasn't around yet,
right.
type of deal.
Yeah.
But by burying them in lime, it would cause the bones to disintegrate.
Yep.
And a forgetfulness of your fathers, and at the very least, it's a disrespect.
Yeah. Well, and it was Moab doing this to Edom's king, and they were still distantly related too. So there was a little bit of family thing going on. So Edom is Jacob's brother Esau.
Right.
Moab was the son of Lot, who was Abraham's nephew. So sort of like second cousins almost.
Right.
So you've got this. There's still a family thing going on there. And Moab and Edom together, they were right next to each other geographically, and the 2 of them were the ones who would not let Israel go through their land. Both of them.
Yeah.
Right. And so in order to get into Canaan. So it's still all in the same geographic area. There's still some issues, with each other and with Israel there.
Chapter 3, we break out and go into something different. So we have a series of examples about Israel as a nation. Mm-hmm. And 3:1 says everyone was brought out of Egypt. So we're talking about both the northern and southern kingdoms here.
Yep.
Versus them pointing, God's talking about you here,
not
me, type of deal.
Yeah.
And then interesting verse in chapter 3, verse 7. Have people brought this verse up to you?
I've definitely seen it in Africa.
Okay.
And from a charismatic standpoint.
It says, certainly the sovereign Lord does nothing without first revealing his plan to his servants, the prophets.
Yep.
So the question is, really?
Yeah.
Everything? Doesn't God withhold things and intentionally keep things?
Somebody actually brought this up not too long ago in a Facebook group that I'm in, these discussion study groups or whatever. Everything God does we know because he has to tell it to his prophets. That's not what this verse is saying in the context.
Yeah, right.
You know.
So you want to go with it?
Well, yeah, it was just, he's talking about, there's a series of questions. Do certain things happen without God's knowledge, without God's, either causation or permission? And then he says, he's not, and it's a passage of judgment, right? And the whole point is that God is not judging Israel without letting them know. He's telling them, he's warned them, he's done all this stuff. Deuteronomy 29 says, The secret things belong to the Lord. So there are things that God is not going to tell us,
Right.
or tell his prophets, or tell whomever. There are some secret things, but the context here is not, oh, God has to tell us everything.
Right. The second half of 3 is the judgment against the northern kingdom, and the idea was because they were violent, they were going to be destroyed by violence.
Yeah.
So this is where where we start getting into the doom and gloom.
Yep. There's the altars, refers to Bethel's altars. So they were setting up altars to false gods. There was a golden calf. They rebuilt a golden calf under Jeroboam's watch, or he built it up, and that's what was going on during this time. So it mentions Ashdod and Egypt. So again, there's still this geopolitical,
A butting of heads. So then in chapter 4, I think this is where we get into a little bit of what you alluded to before. Amos calls some of the elite Israelite women cows. Maybe he calls them a heifer. But
the cows of Bashan.
does that seem like a good play for Christians?
Well, we probably don't want to do anything that's going to be unnecessarily offensive, but this is God's prophet with God's words, so
it seems like
different.
From reading a little bit between the lines, not too much because it's pretty much there. They were leading the high life while others were suffering, and Amos is basically telling them, "You're all going to die."
Yeah. But the thing is that in that context, in Israel, God, under the Mosaic law, had prescribed ways to take care of people, the society to take care of people. It was okay to have rich, it was okay to have poor. That wasn't the problem. In fact, God had promised, I will bless you if you obey me. You will have wealth, you will have prosperity. But when people are poor, this is how you take care of them. That's what the problem was.
Yeah, that they weren't taking care of
they were not only were they worshiping idols and everything, but they were not even obeying the things that God told them to do with each other, right? So the one another's, the neighbors, right? When all the stuff about love your neighbor as yourself, that's all within the context of Israel. They were just lap of luxury, and not even doing that part. So it wasn't about, oh, you have all this stuff and you shouldn't have all this stuff. It's you have all this stuff and you think it's God's blessing while you're in complete disobedience to what he said he would bless you for.
The second part of chapter 4 brings up a reoccurring theme, and I think it's something we still see today, and that is, in the context of the Bible here, people loving to show off, offering public sacrifices. Now, we don't see the sacrifice part today, but the idea is, people were making a big deal about it, but yet they were refusing to have a relationship with him.
Yeah.
Jesus saw it during his time. We see it happening today. People making a big deal, maybe about giving, maybe about helping, maybe about doing something else. But in reality, they're just doing it for themselves, and not for God.
Yeah.
And God promised to bring judgment against these people, or against the people during Amos's time.
Right. Yep. And he says, "This is what I've done." And it was always to bring you back, which goes right back to Deuteronomy, just like he told them he was going to do.
Yeah.
And
multiple times here, it's
repent. Yep. And it's interesting. Like I said, Isaiah was one of the contemporaries of Amos, and it's in Isaiah we see a couple of different times where God says, you have the right motions down, you have the right words down, but your hearts are far from me. Yeah. And that's really what he's looking for.
Yeah, whether it's just route doing things. Are you just showing up to church to get the check mark?
Exactly. The gold star, the attendance. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Right. All right, so chapter 5, we've been calling this doom and gloom. This is the doom and gloom part. The title, and I know the titles aren't inspired and they're added, but the title is Death is Imminent.
Yeah. He says, listen to this funeral song I'm going to sing. Listen to the song of my people, right?
Yeah.
Here's a funeral dirge because you're not listening.
Yeah, and the context is really set. Death is certain on their end. things like only 10% of the people will survive.
Yep.
And, the bad thing is it didn't have to end this way. They had plenty of opportunities.
Yep.
But at some point, God said, we're done.
Yeah. Yep. But even early on, verse 6, seek the Lord so you can live. There is a way out, but if you don't take it, here's your path. Here's where you're headed. I love verse 8. But there is one who made the constellations, the Pleiades and Orion. He can turn the darkness into morning, daylight into night. He summons the water of the seas and pours it out on the earth's surface. Jehovah is his name. Where else are you? Where else what else do you think you're going to do? But that same God flashes destruction down upon the strong.
Right. I like in this section too, he talks about the day of the Lord.
Yeah.
And, we think of the day of the Lord as a great day that's coming. And in fact, I think in the New Testament, it's even that great and terrible day in there. And they're focusing on the terrible part here because Amos and God are saying the day of the Lord is not going to be a good time for you people.
Yeah. Yeah. It almost sounds like they were looking forward to the day of the Lord so that their enemies would be destroyed.
Yeah.
And he's like,
you're right. Yeah, exactly. You're right. You just are wearing the enemy hat.
But you're going to be included if you don't shape up here.
Yeah. Yeah. He does say that, and he says at the end of this chapter, he will drive them into exile. Yeah. So he is telling that even that 10% that's left is going into the exile.
Yep.
And then I think it's kind of cool at the very end of chapter 5. He calls himself the God of the heavenly army.
Yeah. Yep.
If there was any doubt whether he had physical power too.
Yeah. Yeah, the traditional rendering there is the Lord of Hosts or something, Jehovah Sabaoth type thing. But that's what Lord of Hosts means, is the armies of heaven. He has the entire army of heaven at his command. And you think that you can just do what you want?
Yeah, or hide.
Or hide, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, so that's the end of this week's reading, which sort of leaves us in a, down place, right? Funeral dirge, gloom and doom, as you called it, destruction, all that. But we're only halfway through the book.
Right.
So next week...
Well, we can give them a little spoiler, right? So next week, it's more doom and gloom until the very end, right? And the very end, and we saw this a lot in Chronicles, where it is the doom and gloom, but then there is an uplifting.
Yeah.
And hey, when I bring you back.
Yeah.
So it's not even a question of if.
Well, because all of this has to be couched within the Abrahamic covenant and the covenants, the Davidic covenant that Israel cannot be destroyed.
Right. Even by God.
Right. Even by God. Right. Yeah. Now Jeremiah hasn't prophesied yet, so the new covenant, Jeremiah and Ezekiel, the new covenant hasn't been given when Amos was around, but Abraham, the Davidic covenant, these other ones have.
Right.
So, there's.
Yeah. So hang on, it gets better.
It gets better. Yeah. I guess one of the big takeaways from us, we don't have to worry about this. The church isn't going to do this. This isn't about the United States. This isn't about anything. But it still reminds us of who God is and his character, and he expects to be obeyed. And when he isn't obeyed, there are consequences.
Right.
Even if it's not, all doom and gloom for us, there's still consequences for turning away from the path, from God.
Definitely.
So, just a reminder, a lot of our theology about who God is comes from the Old Testament. So next week we'll pick up with chapter 6, and we'll finish Amos, and we'll get into we'll do a one chapter book, and then we'll just keep moving through a few of these prophets. So
good, nice.
All right, see you next time.
Bye.